Hi, my name's Ken Nicholson. I'm from Public Health Scotland, and welcome to our webinar on open data. And thanks to the Data Lab community for inviting us along to do this webinar. I'm an analyst with Public Health Scotland. I've worked for Public Health Scotland and its predecessor for over 20 years with NHS, doing a wide variety of data. Public Health Scotland was founded in 2020, just at the start of the COVID pandemic, and we are made up of a number of organisations that existed before then. Our sort of strategic plan covers a wide range of things, but primarily it's about a Scotland where everyone thrives. So obviously we've got the challenge of COVID-19, life expectancy, health inequalities, climate change, and a wide range of other health matters. Today we're going to be talking about open data. We've been offering open data now for a number of years. I think it's at least 5 or 6 years. Previously it was Information Services Division, which is part of National Health, NHS National Services Scotland. And my colleague here, David Aikman, is going to be taking over. Just to give you a sense of the overall structure of today, after my introduction, David's going to kind of do an overview of open data, where our sort of strategy kind of overview of it. Then he's going to give you a tour of our site, the open data website that we have, and then look at some of the sort of technical connections to that website. And at the end, we've got a kind of a general Q&A. But please, if you've got any questions anyway through the presentation, please do add them to the Q&A or to the chat. And at the end of each section, I will ask any of the pertinent questions to David. Okay, thank you much, and I hope you enjoy today's session.
So yeah, I'm David Aikman, and I've been at Public Health Scotland just since August this year, and I've been working on open data the whole time. And yeah, so if I can just share my screen here, I'll get into it. Okay. All right. So yeah, that's me, David Aikman again. This is the email address for open data. And we're doing this with the Data Lab community. So what is open data? Here's a definition from opendefinition.org. Open data and content can be freely used, modified, and shared by anyone for any purpose. So essentially, the word open in open data means free to access, free to use for everyone. And why is this important for Public Health Scotland? Well, the Scottish government and the UK government both have kind of these strategies or initiatives to open up data, and Public Health Scotland is kind of under the Scottish government. So there's this framework called the FAIR data principles that describes open data, or how open data should be. The F, findable. What this means is that you can find the data. So it has here written data has identifiers. So each bit of data has some kind of unique name or code that allows you to access it. And it has accurate metadata and keywords and tags that helps with searching for data. So if someone is searching for some data about something, it will go through the metadata and the tags of all of the data on your platform, on our platform, and it'll give back the ones that are relevant. Accessible. So this means it's free, it's non-proprietary, and there's no login needed to get the data. It's just out there. There's still the barrier of you need the internet to get the data, but that's, I don't think anyone's going to solve that problem anytime soon. There's interoperable, and what this basically means is that the data should be compatible with a whole range of software, a whole range of operating systems, basically so that anyone can use the data however they want with any programming language, for example. And the R, reusable. So the UK government has its own open license, and you put an open license on something if you want to let people know they can use it for free for anything. So, but of course, for the data to be reusable, it also needs to be kind of accurate and detailed. People need to know what the data means. You can't just put some numbers out there and say, oh, use this. You need to tell people what the data means in order for it to be reusable. So what are we actually talking about when we say open data? So if you look, this is an example of some open data that Public Health Scotland publishes. If you look at the bottom, it's pretty much a table or a spreadsheet. But if you look at the top, that's the file. It's called a CSV. And it's basically a bunch of things separated by commas, comma separated values, CSV. And you can see here that it says in the bottom table, the heading, it says date, country, SAMD, qua. And then at the top in the CSV file, it says date, comma, country, comma, SAMD quintile. So it basically has the comma headings and then each row of the data separated by commas. But the reason why I'm showing you that is because it's a very simple file format that is non-proprietary and compatible with pretty much everything. So you could open up a file like this in Excel. It would look like any other Excel sheet, but you could also open it in any other bit of software that can open data. If we now can contrast this with kind of traditional data sharing, this is some open data that we publish for a cancer waiting times publication. I don't know if I said open data there. This is some data that is not open example. And you can see it's an Excel spreadsheet. You might not be able to see it well, but the point is that it's got these filters. It has kind of unpredictable data layout with many different headers. And there's a lot of sheets in the Excel file. And what this means is that really only a person who's using Excel and can operate this data. And so if someone wants to use the data for another analysis, they don't want to use Excel, it's going to be extremely difficult for them to get the data that they want out of this spreadsheet. But the filters that it has here as an example, they're a bad thing in terms of open data, but they're a good thing in terms of functionality, because some people might not know how to filter data by themselves. By that, I mean, if we just give them a big thing of open data, there's just a bunch of numbers, it's not very useful. But if we give them something like this, it is useful if they want to be able to look at it with filters and things like that. So I wouldn't say you should abandon sharing this type of data, but we should also be sharing open data. So now I'm going to give you a tour of the open data platform to show you the kind of data sets that we have on there and the structure. The site. So I should now share a different screen. And yeah, unless Ken, do you have any comments or questions about open data?
Yeah, no, while you're opening it up, there isn't any questions, but it's good to see some people from universities coming along. And I was just saying that we're wanting more universities to be able to use the open data as part of their courses, both undergraduate and postgraduate. So we're working with some MSc students and PhD students using our data, and that's really, really exciting stuff. There you go, back to you.
Right, yeah, that's great. Yeah, it's telling me that my internet connection is unstable, so I hope everyone can hear me okay. But this is the, okay, great, yeah. And you can see the website?
Yep, you can see the website.
Cool, nice, okay. So this is the homepage. It's got information about the daily COVID data updates on here. But what we want to see is this page, the datasets page. And you can see this is a list of the data sets on our site in the order in which they were updated last. So these two will usually be at the top because they are updated every day. So we have 100 data sets, although I can see the private data sets because I'm logged in as the open data team. So this number will be lower if you look at the site. I also have this add data set button, which you won't have. You can't just add any data on here. So we have themes of the data: health and care, health protection, practitioner services, things in groups. So there's a COVID-19 group, which has 19 data sets in there. But importantly, there's a search function. If you want to find out information about something specific, let's say you want to find out information about hearts, you've got two data sets that come up: Scottish heart disease statistics and Scottish stroke statistics. If we look at one of these, you'll see that although it's a data set, it actually contains 4 different data files. So it's a collection of data, is what data set means on this platform. And you can see here each data set has a little description. It's telling you stuff about the data and the fact it's related to a publication. A lot of the open data that we publish is related to a publication. If you scroll down, you see the tags of this data set, and then you come down here to the metadata of the entire data set. And this tells you who publishes it. And if you click here, you can send an email to that team to ask about the data. And this is kind of the important stuff here. If you're using any data, you want to look at the fields: completeness, accuracy, continuity of data. These are little notes about things in the data. And there's often a useful links field in the metadata as well. Now, if we take a look at a single resource or data file, you can see that this has its own little description, and it gives you a preview of the data in a table here. And you scroll down, it has a data dictionary. And this is, I think, is great. It just lists the columns that are in the data file and then gives you a description of what it means. It's a bit confusing because the label column has a description and the description column has links, but that's how the platform we use defines what should be in these columns. So if we scroll even further down, we can see the metadata for this specific data file. Tells you like stuff like when it was created, the license, that's important, UK Open Government license, but that's the same for all of our data sets. And yeah, let's think, what else have we got? I could show you some more examples. So if we look at the daily COVID data set, it has a very big description because there's constantly notes being added. It gets updated every day and it gets changed a lot. So we have to keep up to date with that. And then if you just click on one of these, you get the same little preview of the data, the data dictionary, and the metadata. Now I thought,
I think it's important, David, to highlight that a lot of the descriptions that are embedded in this website are also the ones that are with the original data that we use within Public Health Scotland, that gives sort of the data definitions for the data set.
right, you mean it's
So in essence, the people using the open data platform are getting the same kind of information on the data that, you know, health board users will be getting access to, Scottish Government users will get access to.
right, yeah, yes, yeah. So that in the open data, it's not like some kind of abridged version of the actual data. It is the actual data with the original descriptions attached to it.
Yeah, there is a question about the uses of community prescription data. from this platform.
Oh yeah.
I mean, there is a lot of research that use prescriptions data through an organisation called IDRIS, which is part of Public Health Scotland, which is getting direct access to data. So, but I think there are some that use the open data platform for that as well. Is that the case, David?
Oh, yeah, definitely. So here's the open data for that, prescriptions in the community, and we got an email today from a journalist asking about using this. So people do use the open data for prescriptions data. Yeah.
Yeah, because there's a rising number of journalists and media utilizing open data for that kind of purpose.
Yes, definitely. Yeah. Yeah.
There's another question around the lack of the UPRNs, or unique property reference numbers, for dental practices, hospitals, etc. I mean, we do have that
Yeah.
kind of
Yeah.
information. There is some, because I think some of the hospitals are listed in some of the open data. But yeah, maybe it's something that we could be looking to incorporate more frequently.
So, yeah. No, yeah. We don't have unique identifiers for everything like that. We could, but it would. So we did some user research a while ago that found that this type of data that doesn't use kind of is not linked, which is what the unique identifiers would allow, is actually more desirable by users because it's a bit less complicated. But it would be better practice to have unique identifiers for things like dental practices. Yeah.
Yeah, it's Will Hensman that asked the question. I think the follow-up question gives a bit more context. So he's asking about that there isn't the lats and longs or XY chords on the data. We
Right.
do have
Yeah.
a
Yeah.
mapping team that's being developed, and I suspect that they might provide data or linkable data that then could provide that kind of information. Is that right, David?
Yeah, that's right. We've actually been speaking to the geospatial data science people at Public Health Scotland about adding the latitude, longitude data to geographical locations, which will make it much easier to analyze like spatially.
Absolutely. I mean, there is a lot more data that we hold as an organization, and ultimately it's a matter of time for additional bits to be added into the open data. So it's a journey, as they say. Okay.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah.
There's a lot of positive feedback saying it's very
Great.
useful, using it for predictive purposes. Um, uh, yeah, there is the comment about the fact that files tend to be separated out into multiple files rather than as one whole piece.
Yeah. Yeah.
Specifically
So
around care homes, but
yeah.
do you want to say something about that?
Yeah. Well, so if I just share this again, you'll see this one is separated into different files when it could be one. In this case, it's because it would be a huge file if it was like that. So you have to consider, and that reduces usability. But there probably are cases where it could be condensed into a single file, which would be more easy to use. But sometimes you don't want to make a single file too complicated as well for users.
Yeah.
But I can
I mean,
understand why it would be frustrating if you wanted all of the data and it's in separate files. Yeah.
Yeah, I did put the email address for the open data sort of help desk in the chat, and please, when you come to the site, if there's anything like that you notice, please do email us, because any feedback that we get can sort of come into the process and improve what we're offering.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay, do you want to move on to the next bit? Oh, hang on a sec. There's also a Q&A. Actually, I think we'll leave that one to the end, Chantal.
All right, cool.
Okay.
Yeah. So next bit, we're going to be looking at this. I just need to swap my screen share again. So we're going to be looking at the uses of open data and methods of accessing the open data. And to sum it all up, we have this diagram. And the general point of this diagram is people want open data for different reasons. So we have general public, a blogger or journalist, an academic, developers, and then on the top, it has different ways of accessing the data, and the lines are meant to show, for example, how the general public would want to access the data, how a data scientist would want to access the data, and it might not be correct, but the point is that people want the data for different reasons, and for that reason, we need to cater for all of the ways people want to access the data. And people can access it in their browser just by going to the website and looking at the preview of the data. There's an easy download button and programmatic interface. This is an API, and that's what we're going to be talking about next, doing a little demo of how to access the data using the API. So I just need to do this. Unless we have any more questions while I'm just opening up the API demo.
Just a quick one about how often the data is updated. I'll field this one. It really depends on the team that are providing the data. So though David is kind of like the coordinator for Public Health Scotland, we have teams across Public Health Scotland that are responsible for each of the different data sets. So there's quite a lot of data that's updated monthly. I think there's some that are weekly, and then there'll be others that will be quarterly or yearly. It just depends on what the data is and the priority of it, obviously. David, do you want to add to
that? Yeah, it just depends on, because a team might have a publication that comes out once a month or something, and then the data will get updated once a month. But related to that, also when we were talking about just a moment ago about things being in different files, that might be because that's how it's presented in a publication. So it's separated in the publication, and it's separated again in the open data, just to make the kind of parallel. Okay, so the API. So first of all, what is an API? An API is basically a way for computers to talk to each other. So one computer will ask another for some information, and this often takes the form of a web address being hosted by one computer, a server, and then another computer going to that website and asking for some information. And we can actually do this now. We want to get a list of all the data sets that we have on our open data platform. And to do that, we go to this website, and this is basically the URL of the platform. And then this is telling it we want a list of the data sets, and package here means data set confusingly. So if we open this in a new tab, this is what we see. It's just a big block of text that's very hard to understand, but very easy to understand for a computer. But if we look very closely, I'm going to highlight, here is the list of data sets that we have, the names of them. Obviously, that's not a good way to look at the list of the data sets. So what we can do is we can use a programming language. We're going to use R. I've got a JavaScript example there just for good measure. So if we just head over to this, we're going to get a list of data sets on the platform. Just need this URL, the same URL we're in this other tab. And we're going to use the HTTR package which is a package for doing HTTP API stuff in R. And we just run that. And then you get a response. And the response is kind of this confusing response from the server. And we can just use the content function to get that into a format that we can understand. And you'll see here, we now have a list of the data sets on the site. They're in alphabetical order, and they're all formatted in lowercase like this because they are part of a URL. So, but why would you want to use the API when you can just download the data from the website? There's a couple of reasons why you might want to. One is that you can filter before you download it. So let's, for example, you want some data from this resource called Daily Case Trends by Health Board. We can have a look at it. I just need to move this. Okay. So if we want some of the data from this, it's a COVID-19 data set that tells you the cases in each health board. A health board is just an area of Scotland. And look here, for example, there was one case in Tayside, what's that, a few days ago. But let's say you don't want all this information. You see there's 11,000 rows here. You think, I don't want all of that information. I just want information about NHS Tayside. What you could do is download the whole file and filter it out yourself, but that means you have to download a bigger file than you need. And in some cases, you can have millions of rows of data. In this case, it's not really a big deal, but this is just an example. So what you can do is, and you don't need to memorize this or anything, it's just an example of how you can use the API. We add this to the end of our URL that says query equals HP name NHS Tayside. So we're telling it, we just want the rows of this data set, not that one, this one, where HP name is equal to NHS Tayside. So let's try that out. And we'll set the data. Here we go. We now have a data frame with only rows of the data that have HP name equal to NHS Tayside. And a further reason why you might want to use the API, and why I think most people use the API, is if you want to have regular downloads of data. For example, if you've developed, say, a dashboard that shows COVID-19 data, you want to keep it up to date, you want to download the data every day, but you don't want to download the data every day, go to each page of each thing and click download. You want to automate that. You automate a call to the API, your computer will do it for you every day, much easier than you having to do it. And a lot of organizations and journalists actually do this already. But, you know, this is kind of fiddly, these long URLs for the API. So we've made a package, PHS Open Data, that kind of wraps around the API and makes it a bit simpler. And I'm going to do a bit of a demo of that just now. So to install the package, you can use, you have to install it from GitHub because it's not on CRAN. So you can use the remotes package. I've already installed it, so I'm not going to run this code. But what we need to do is we need to know the ID of a data set in order to download it. So I actually skipped that here. So step one, I skipped ahead to step two. Step one is find a resource's ID. So we're going to go, not this page, to this page. We're just going to get a resource ID. How you would do that is you would, sorry, my internet is slow. Here we go. You would go say you're interested in this. Come down here, click on the data file, and in the URL, you can see this big code. It's I don't know how many characters, and we're going to copy that. So, and we're going to use that to download it here. So you see, we set the ID variable equal to this, and then we use the get resource function to get that. And here, this is for a different data set. So I'm going to just replace that.
There's a question from Eleanor just asking, I assume that the PHS open data is only available for R at the moment and not Python?
It actually is available for Python as well.
Oh, excellent. That's really
but
good.
we're only develop it because we're going to add some features to the package, and there's no plans to add it to the Python package. So the Python package will be able to do everything you see me doing today, but in the future, the R package might get a bit of an upgrade.
Okay. Because obviously the other benefit of doing this programmatically is people could have visualizations or tables that are created directly off the open data as they're being loaded in their web page. And
Yep.
that could be done in R, but it probably more likely to be done in Python. So that could be a really beneficial use.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah. Oh, I think it's done now. So let's see what happened there. We have this variable data, and it should be pretty much exactly what you see here in the preview. But notably, though, it doesn't, using the API, it doesn't give you the ID column. Sorry, not using the package PHS open data. So, and yeah, you can also, in the get resource function, you can add a row limit if you only want a certain number of rows. So this one, for example, it's sorted in terms of how recent it is. So if you think, oh, I only want data that's from this particular date, the 10th one, that 2020, 05, 03, then you can set the limit to 10, and then your data will be just 10 rows, and it will only go up to this particular date. And now there's another thing you can do with the open data package, and this is kind of related to what we were talking about before. You can download all of the resources within a data set all at once. This works best if the resources, the data files, all have the same column names, because get data set, the function, tries to merge it all together. So we'll see that with the community pharmacy data. And just here, we need to get the name of the data set from the URL and then plug it into the get dataset function that's already there. And then you'll see this might take longer than the rest of them. So yes, downloading a few data frames there. It's going to download, I don't know how many there are, and then it's going to merge them all together, put them all on top of each other. And here we have 120,000 rows of data about different pharmacy payments. So that helps if you're thinking, oh, I'm sorry, yeah.
I've got another question from Rachel about API limits. Is there limits on calls per day?
I actually don't know. I think there probably is, but I don't think it's low enough for it to be a worry. We do try to limit the number of calls we make, just because sometimes the server that it's running on, the performance can be hurt if there's too much API activity. But I don't know the actual the limit for the API. But I wouldn't worry about it unless you're, automating like hundreds of calls per day to the API. But yes, so if you wanted all of the data from all these files, you're thinking, why are they in separate files? I want the data from 2014 to 2021. You can use the get dataset function. And you can do that in Python as well. So yeah, is there any more questions about the API, uses of the API?
Yeah, Lee emphasised that R can be called through Python. So even though there might be differences in the future, then you could use that RPY2 package to be able to get around that. But there aren't any other questions specifically around that piece. I'll put my video on again. Hello, everybody. We'll go back to Chantal's question in a moment, but please, if anybody has any more general questions, now's the time to ask those. And I'm going to be asking David some questions as well, and possibly talk broadly about open data in a moment. But Chantal's asked whether PHS involved in the ongoing development of the mental health strategy data framework. I suspect that will be the case. I don't know if you've heard anything specific, David.
No, I have not actually.
Yeah. This is where we be open and honest and say that we're an organisation of about 1,400 people. So there is an awful lot of things that are going on. We can find out about this question about the mental health data strategy framework. Please email us around it, and we can forward it on to the relevant people to find out what's going on. But there almost certainly is. We have a mental health team with a significant number of people, and there is mental health data on the open data platform as well.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it would be good if we had one big data strategy at Public Health Scotland, but it's not there yet. I see it.
Somebody's how much quality checking of the data is done? There's quite a range of things. I'll cover some of this, Dave. So we do have a number of teams who are responsible for checking the data that comes in. So depending on the data source, there are different ways that the data is brought into PHS. It's generally submitted by the boards or the health social care partnerships themselves. So there's a kind of a data checking element that goes on in the source data out there in the system. And then when it is submitted, there are a number of checks that are made to ensure that the data is of the right quality. And then there are teams within PHS that go and check random selections against that data. Having said that, there is data quality issues with some of the data that we hold, not data that we put on the open data platform, because as I say, we hold a lot more data than we make available. And we do notice that there are some issues in the open data as well. So if you do come across anything that seems a bit odd, please do email us. We had this recently where somebody went, oh, that doesn't make sense. And we went back to the original team and got it updated. So please do find these things, because there's always oddities that come up. Do you want to add to that, David?
Yeah, so yeah, I think most of the data checking gets done before it becomes open data. And when we upload the data to the open data platform, we check things like date formats. If there's a code for a particular hospital, we make sure that code is for a hospital that exists, that kind of stuff. But making sure that the data is accurate and things like that is done before it gets to the open data stage.
Okay. There's a question from Frida, or probably one or two. The other one will come up in a moment. Is there a plan for making any unstructured data available, such as medical imaging? We do hold a lot of medical imaging data. I think that can only be accessed through IDRIS, which is that part of our organization that you can get access to the data for research purposes. Any other kind of unstructured data tends, unfortunately, to be sort of sensitive or identifiable. So it can't often be made available. But we could explore the possibilities of making some unstructured data available. Any thoughts, David? I think you might have frozen.
Yeah, that sounds like no, that sounds really interesting. I hadn't thought about that. I'm not sure how it would work with our current open data platform. And it's a good point that you made, actually. We haven't mentioned that because this is health data and everything, it needs to be anonymous. so we can't publish everything. Yeah.
Yeah. Demetrius has asked about whether we use SQL. We certainly do have SQL databases that a lot of this data actually sits on in terms of where it's stored. And we as an organization do use SQL, though maybe not as much as we will in the future. Any other points about that, David?
Yeah, yeah, I personally don't use SQL, but you can use SQL to query the API for open data.
Yeah. There's a couple of questions that kind of connected about what kind of inquiries, areas of work does open data generally get used for, and the kind of current interesting uses of data by the platform. This is maybe where I prompt you about traveling Tabby, maybe.
Yeah, well, I actually have a couple of slides about users of the open data. Shall I pull those up?
Yeah, go for it. While you're doing that, yeah, Demetrius, yes, the data for medical uses can be accessed by researchers through our eDRIS service. I'll try and find the email for that and add it to the chat. Over to you, David.
Yeah, so you mentioned the traveling Tabby. This is a website that has a very good dashboard for UK COVID data. It kind of looks like this. And they use the Open Data API, I believe, to get this data. And this dashboard is quite a bit more popular than Public Health Scotland's own dashboard, which just shows that having the open data increases like the range of where the data can go in the world, because more people have seen this information due to the fact the data was open than if it wasn't, because this developer wouldn't have been able to make this dashboard. And there's another example here. It's kind of surprising. There's a bit of software called Drone Desk for flying drones. The kit tells you, I think, gives you some maps and things. And they use our open data to label the hospitals in Scotland. It tells you the information about the nearest hospital for your drone flight. And then, yeah, a lot the public use the data sets a lot. And I think we have a slide of, you can leave comments, and there's quite a lot of people who comment on our data. So it just shows that there's a lot of interest and a lot of people using it. And then if we ourselves use the open data to get things like reference files and codes for geography and things like that. So that's those are the main users of the open data that I could think of when I was making this.
So Gordon has asked a really interesting question about what checks are in place to ensure identifiable data isn't made available, so they can't, and so individuals can't be re-identified. So as David said earlier, an awful lot of the data that's put on the platform comes actually through our publication process. And as part of that publication process, there is disclosure control methods that are put in place, which in essence ensure that small numbers or anything that could be identifiable are removed. This disclosure protocol is unsurprisingly even more strict when it comes to more sensitive data types. So, the big things like, A&E waiting times, the same disclosure put onto them as might be, certain mental health conditions. Is there any other ones that are done specifically for the open data, David?
I don't think so. No, but just kind of as a general concrete example, sometimes you might say as a rule of thumb that you shouldn't publish, say if you have information about different areas and who's got COVID in that area, if there's only, say, a few people, you don't want to publish that because someone might know someone in the area who has had a case of it, and then they would know who that was. It would be identifiable. But there are more stringent things than that, I think, that goes on in the publication process, the disclosure process.
Yeah, we have a wide range of information governance protocol that goes on any data that we make available, whether that is published open data to researchers, which is heavily controlled, and also we have a thing called management information, which makes data available to boards and Scottish Government and the like, and there's disclosure protocols on those as well. Just to answer a couple of questions quickly. Ravi, yes, there will be a recording of the session afterwards. It's going to be made available, I think, on YouTube. It'll be through the Data Lab community. Elena, a university student can use the open data. In fact, anybody can use the open data for any project. There is an open government license that explains how data can be used and for what purposes. Demetrius, we are predominantly R users. There are people who have Python. I suspect over time Python will become more used, but it's predominantly R at present. The disclosure controls are not automated. I think there are some routines that do disclosure control, but they're mostly human controlled. So I suppose combination of both is the correct answer. There's no more items in the Q&A. Do you want to just briefly talk about any current plans for open data and where we're going to go with that?
Yeah, well, so the main plan is just more open data. But as for kind of big changes, we perhaps want to have kind of public involvement with the open data a bit more, engagement, maybe some kind of challenge based on one of the open data sets to help, spread awareness so that there is all this open data here people can use.
I think that chimes in with Afeni. She put a message about if PHS was to publish more of the uses and applications of open data, then maybe more people would use it. And I think that's a great example. I mean, what you're describing there, David, is sort of similar to a Kaggle kind of situation, which I'm hoping many people on this call will know about. So Kaggle is like one of the major data science communities around machine learning and predictives. And absolutely, yeah, we could get people to use open data to start looking at that kind of thing. And somebody also made a point about hackathons. We have actually done hackathons in the past with open data. In fact, the very first version of the open data platform was created for a hackathon that we did. So yeah, absolutely, that would be another good opportunity. What developments would we like to see to using this data? What do you think, David? Have you got any thoughts about how this data could be used that aren't being used?
Well, I'm not sure. No, I don't really have any amazing ideas. No. But yeah, I would like to see, someone just said they make maps. I would like to see some more maps of this data, but which would probably help if we had the actual geography data in there. So, yeah.
Yeah. And interestingly, there is the opportunity to link data based upon location. So it's not linked on the individuals, but you could go, here's all the data for a particular hospital and how that all adds up together. Sally has made a point about small numbers for sensitive topics. Do we remove the data or recategorize? It really depends on the way the data is structured. The sort of the standard way of doing disclosure control is to remove small numbers under a certain number. That changes depending on what type of data it is. So it can be under 10 or under 5, depending on the data. We don't tend to recategorize a huge amount, but I suppose we do recategorize this source data for quite a few things. So take an example, admission type how you get admitted to a hospital, I think there's about 20 different options for that to be recorded by the boards, but I think we only publish maybe 4 or 5. So we do some of the recategorization anyway, and that resolves a lot of the disclosure problems. Image data for autistic children. There may well be. All I know is that there is an awful lot of imaging data, but it's all being dealt with by Idris, and it's quite tricky to get access. So I put an email to Idris in there, so please do contact them about any opportunities. Somebody earlier had made a point about using machine learning on imaging data, and I know there's a lot of that that's going on around the world, and it would be a great opportunity to do that. But I think the way that the images are structured makes it quite tricky to make them available as open data. Somebody made a point about linking PHS and SIMD open data, and yes, I think that'd be a really good thing. I suspect there should be SIM data within some of our open data. Can you think of that, David?
Yeah, we have quite a lot of we've got quite a lot of SIMD data, but maybe it's hard to find because it is within other data sets. It's not got its own section on the platform.
Yeah. And just a shout out for Will Hansman's message there. Yeah, there's a spatial hub improvement service, so please do get in touch with people around geospatial elements. And I suspect, Will, that you know Andy Gancharovsky, who's one of our geospatial people at PHS. Everything's moving very quickly. Here's an interesting discussion point, David. I had a workshop with some people around open data, and one of our sort of thinking pieces was the most used open data in the world is travel data, is buses, airplanes, and the like. And all of that is, when we discussed it a bit more detail, the reason why we think that's valuable is that a bus or an airplane is a single unit. It's a kind of the lowest level unit, and it's difficult for us in health to have a similar kind of granularity, because the further we go down, the more disclosive it is, the more we can't make it available. Is there something we can do to try and replicate the usefulness or the structural usefulness of the health data to be more like bus data or train data? What do you think?
Yeah, well, yeah, that does. Yeah, the more lower level is, in some way, the more useful it would be. But yeah, I could, only thing I can think of is synthetic data, where we simulate single unit data based on the real data, but it's fake. But I'm not sure how useful that would be for a lot of applications.
Yeah. Just to let everybody know on the call that PHS is working on synthetic data. So we've got some colleagues who've been working for a number of years around this. And once we've got ways of doing it, I suspect that something like that will be made available through the Open Data Platform, or something connected to the Open Data Platform, maybe. Interestingly, the workshop we had, we came to, there was somebody there who was very interested in diabetes. And what they were interested in was saying, could there be a unit, a level of unit like a bus or a train that describes a cohort of diabetes individuals, so that it's still aggregate data, but it's almost like you go, here's all diabetes for an area, and here's all the non-diabetes as 2 rows of data, and the comparison between the two. I suspect at the moment we don't really do that, because a lot of what we produce is related to publications. But maybe if we got a drive from the community for this kind of thing, maybe that would help. What are your thoughts on that kind of thing?
Yeah, that sounds great. If we can work out a way to produce useful groups of people, because you can always just group people together and it ends up being a bit arbitrary. But that does sound like it would be quite a good way of getting that kind of data without risking de-anonymizing people.
I mean, maybe that connects in with some of the people's comments about SIMD and deprivation zones. That maybe you could have a kind of a group that is the the quintiles or the deciles, and then so instead of presenting the data as the way health presents it with that decile information added on, you kind of turn it on its head and say, for these deciles or these quintiles, this is the answers for that. Almost doing the analysis for people.
Right, yeah. So almost like one big thing. It has the different quintiles and then lots of different variables telling you about the outcomes for each quintile. Yeah.
Yeah. Any other questions that anybody has? Oh, right, yeah. So Demetrius has asked about a new framework that will make it easier for people to open data and train deep learning models. I mean, I think for that to work, we're going to need to be making a lot more data available at a lower level, probably.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah.
Oh, yeah, and ScotFo, of course. Chantal mentioned ScotFo, the Scottish Public Health Observatory data. And that often presents that kind of data in that way. Actually, that's an interesting point. Do we have the ScotFo data in the open data?
I think we might have some. We don't have all of it. I'm not. We have specific. We have a data set about suicide, for example, from ScotFo, but we don't have all of the data from the Public Health Observatory now.
Yeah. Okay. I think I've covered all the questions. There's no other quick Q&As in that one. So thank you all very much for attending. And thank you, David, for your wonderful presentations. Hopefully this has been a very useful guided tour of open data. And please do contact us on the email address. We should have put that up on a slide, actually, shouldn't we? Do you want to quickly write it on the slide and then you can bring it up? So it'll be at the end of the presentation.
Wait, so which email address?
Just your one. The open data
Cool.
one.
Yeah. Okay. Here we go.
So you'll get lots of emails from everyone going, "Oh, can I get this and can I get that?"
Nice.
Please do email us. It's really important that people send us emails. There you go, open data platform. It's really important people email us because nothing can get changed unless people tell us what needs to be changed. But thank you very much for everybody, and see you all soon. Bye.